The chandeliers dripped light onto a sea of curated smiles. Each reflection in the polished marble floor, a distorted echo of the city's elite. Crystal flutes chimed a delicate, constant music against the murmur of pedigreed conversation. This was the annual Architects Guild Benevolence Gala, a night where the city's builders celebrated themselves by writing checks for the less fortunate. A grand performance of philanthropy, staged in the grand ballroom of the Thorn Plaza Hotel. And Alara Vance, once the brightest star in their firmament, was in attendance. She felt the weight of their gazes, a physical pressure on her skin. They were sidelong glances over the rims of champagne glasses, whispers behind silk-gloved hands, the subtle stiffening of a spine as she passed. For 5 years, she had been a ghost, a cautionary tale told to ambitious interns. The architect who flew too close to the sun, the woman who built the Meridian Tower. Tonight, she was attempting a resurrection, dressed in a simple, severe black gown that was its own form of armor. Her presence was a quiet declaration. I am still here. A polite ripple of applause signaled the start of the evening's main event, the presentation of the Vanguard Award. The host, a silver-haired sycophant from the Guild's board, began his glowing introduction of the recipient, a man whose vision has not just shaped our skyline, but defined it, a titan of industry, a patron of the arts, a true pillar of our community. Mr. Julian Thorne. Thorne ascended the stage, a vision of bespoke tailoring and predatory grace. He was handsome in a severe, classical way, with eyes the color of a winter sky and a smile that never quite reached them. The room's adoration was a palpable force, a wave of deference and awe that washed over him. He accepted the heavy crystal award, holding it up to the light as if weighing it. "Thank you," he began, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that carried to every corner of the ballroom. "It is an honor to be recognized by my peers. But we all know that great structures are never the work of one man." He scanned the crowd, his gaze sweeping over the tables of rapt faces until, with unerring precision, it landed on Alara. His smile widened by a fraction of an inch, a subtle, chilling adjustment. "Take the new Atlas Center, for example," he continued, his eyes still locked on hers. "A truly magnificent addition to our city, a testament to the genius of a young architect I have come to admire greatly. Daniel Chen." The name struck Alara like a physical blow. The Atlas Center. Her design. It had been her comeback project, a smaller commission she had poured her soul into under the banner of a boutique firm. Her one chance to claw her way back. The core concepts. The innovative use of sustainable materials. The signature sweep of the atrium. It was all hers. Chen was a competent project manager. Nothing more. A confused murmur went through the room. A few people who knew the truth shifted uncomfortably. Daniel Chen, seated at a table near the front, flushed a deep, embarrassed crimson. Thorne didn't let the moment of confusion linger. He pressed on, his voice laced with a counterfeit sympathy that was sharper than any overt insult. "And, of course, we must always remember the lessons of the past, the risks inherent in our field. It reminds us to be grateful for those who persevere, even after unfortunate setbacks." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, heavy and loaded. "I see Alara Vance is with us tonight." Every head in the ballroom turned. It was no longer a collection of subtle glances. It was a unified, piercing stare. Alara felt like a specimen under 1,000 microscopes. "It's so brave of you to show your face." "Alara," Thorne said, his voice a balm of poison. "Most people in your position would have simply disappeared. I admire your resilience." The public humiliation was complete. It was masterful in its cruelty, No raised voice. No vulgar accusations. Just a calm, polite execution in front of everyone who had ever mattered in her professional life. He had not only stolen her latest work, but had also dragged the corpse of her greatest failure out into the light for all to see. Her composure did not break. She met his gaze across the vast, silent room, her expression serene, almost placid. She offered him the smallest, most inscrutable of smiles, and gave a slow, deliberate nod, an acknowledgement of his move on this grand chessboard, to the room. It looked like defeat, a graceful surrender, but it was not. It was a promise. Inside her mind, the polished ballroom dissolved. The clinking of crystal faded, replaced by a sound she would never forget: the groan of dying steel. 5 years earlier, the scream of twisting metal was the first thing, a deep, guttural roar from the bones of the building. Alara stood on the observation deck of the newly completed Meridian Tower, her creation, her triumph. At 32, she was the youngest architect to ever gift the city such a jewel. Wind whipped her hair as she looked out, not at the panoramic view, but at the clean, elegant lines of the structure beneath her, the culmination of a decade of her life. Then came the tremor, a violent shudder that ran up the spine of the tower, throwing her against the safety glass. Below, the city lights blurred, a fine, white dust, the pulverized essence of concrete, began to rain down from the ceiling. Panic erupted around her. Dignitaries and investors, moments ago toasting her success with champagne, were now scrambling, screaming. She knew, with the cold, sick certainty of a creator watching her creation die. What was happening? It was impossible. Her calculations had been checked and rechecked. The materials, the engineering, the very physics of it all perfect. Yet the impossible was happening. She remembered seeing a young intern, a bright girl with eager eyes who had followed her around for months, staring up at the ceiling with a look of pure, uncomprehending terror. Lily. That was her name. Alara had started to move toward her, to pull her toward the emergency stairwell. When the floor gave a final, convulsive heave, the world became a symphony of destruction, the shattering of 1,000 windows, the shriek of steel giving way, the deafening avalanche of concrete and glass. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was Lily's face. A silent scream, lost in the cacophony as the sky fell in. The memory receded. Leaving the glittering ballroom in its wake, Julian Thorne was concluding his speech to thunderous applause. Alara remained seated, her hands resting calmly in her lap. The public shaming, the theft of her work, it was all just fuel. For 5 years, she had grieved. She had hidden. She had accepted the blame the world had placed upon her shoulders. She had allowed herself to be broken. But beneath the surface of that serene composure, something had been meticulously rebuilt. Thorne, in his arrogance, thought he was delivering the final, killing blow. He had no idea he was witnessing the unveiling. He saw a victim. He did not see the architect of his ruin. Her calm was not a mask for pain. It was a mask for a plan, forged in the silence of her exile, as carefully designed as any skyscraper. And tonight, he had just laid the cornerstone. Alara waited for the applause to die down. She picked up her clutch, rose from her chair with a quiet grace that drew no attention, and walked toward the exit. She didn't look back. The ghost of Meridian Tower was leaving the ball, but Alara Vance was finally, irrevocably, going to war. The sterile, intimidating atmosphere of the Thorne Consolidated Headquarters was a world away from the cloying luxury of the gala. Here, power wasn't displayed with chandeliers and champagne. It was communicated through hushed tones, acres of polished granite, and the unnerving silence of perfect efficiency. Julian Thorne sat behind a desk the size of a small boat, a slab of black marble that seemed to absorb all the light in the penthouse office. Panoramic windows displayed the city he owned, a kingdom of glass and steel spread at his feet. Across from him sat Daniel Chen, looking small and miserable in a leather chair that was too large for him. The board was pleased with the media coverage of the Atlas Center, Thorne said, his voice smooth and devoid of emotion. He tapped a finger on a tablet displaying headlines that praised Chen's visionary design. Your career is off to a remarkable start. Mr. Thorne, Daniel began, his voice barely a whisper. I can't. It's not right. The design was Alara's. Everyone knows it. Thorne looked up from the tablet, and for the first time, a flicker of something cold and hard entered his eyes. What everyone knows is what I tell them. You are the face of the project. You will accept the accolades. You will give the interviews. You will take credit for every beam and every pane of glass. Is that understood? But my reputation. You have no reputation. Thorne cut in, the words sharp as glass. I am giving you one, a gift. You can accept it, and with it, a future beyond your wildest dreams. Or you can refuse, and spend the rest of your career designing strip malls in the suburbs. The choice is yours, Daniel. But make it now. Daniel swallowed hard, his gaze falling to the plush carpet. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint hum of the building's climate control. I understand. He finally mumbled. Good, Thorne said, his voice returning to its placid calm. He dismissed Daniel with a flick of his wrist, his attention already back on his tablet. He was pruning a rose bush, snipping away a thorny, inconvenient branch. He gave no further thought to Alara Vance. In his mind, she was a ghost, a piece of the past he had successfully buried for a second time. It was a fatal miscalculation. Alara's apartment was the antithesis of Thorne's opulent world. It was a minimalist loft in a converted warehouse district, a space of clean lines, exposed brick, and polished concrete floors. For 5 years, it had been a sanctuary and a prison. The furniture was sparse and functional, a drafting table that saw little use, a single Eames chair, a bed. The walls were bare, stripped of the awards and accolades that had once defined her. The stark, empty space was a perfect mirror of her emotional state hollowed out, waiting to be filled. She stood before the one personal item on display, a large, framed architectural rendering of the Meridian Tower, a phantom limb of the city's skyline. She ran her fingers over the glass, her touch light and reverent. 5 years. Lily. She whispered to the ghost of the building, and to the ghost of the young woman who had died within it. I let him do this to us for 5 years. She turned away from the rendering and walked to a closet. She entered a code into a keypad, and a section of the wall slid away, revealing not clothes, but a meticulously organized, climate-controlled server rack humming softly in the darkness. This was her real sanctuary. She sat at a simple desk, the cool glow of 3 monitors illuminating her face. With a few keystrokes, she brought the system to life. For years, it had been dormant, a silent repository of every blueprint, every email, every structural analysis report from her past life. It was all there, the digital ghost of her career. She opened a secure, encrypted messaging program. The contact list was short, populated by ghosts of a different sort. She hesitated for only a second before typing a message to a name she hadn't contacted in half a decade. Marcus, I need to see you. It's time. She sent the message, and then opened another window. This one was a portal to the dark web, a place of anonymity and specialized skills. She navigated to a discreet forum, a place where freelancers of a certain digital inclination offered their services. She posted a simple, coded request for a forensic data analyst, one with expertise in untraceable penetration and financial tracking. The fee she offered was substantial, drawn from the last vestiges of her savings. Then, she pulled up a live feed from a city traffic camera, one she had looped into her system long ago. It was aimed at the entrance of the Thorne Plaza Hotel. She watched as Julian Thorne's black sedan pulled up, a chauffeur holding the door as Thorne emerged, immaculate and untouchable. Alara's expression was calm, her hands steady on the keyboard. The same hands that had once designed soaring towers of glass and steel were now preparing to orchestrate a demolition. The stark, empty apartment no longer felt like a prison. It was becoming a war room. The first pieces were being moved into place. Thorne saw a city of buildings to be owned. Alara Vance saw a system of intricate structures, and she knew better than anyone how to find the load-bearing walls and precisely where to place the charges. The diner was a relic, a pocket of the city that time had forgotten. Chrome stools, red vinyl booths, and the lingering scent of coffee and old grease. Marcus Thorne, no relation. A cosmic joke Alara had long ceased to find amusing, slid into the booth opposite her. Age had been kind to him, but his eyes, magnified by thick glasses, held a permanent sadness. He had been her professor, her mentor, the one who had championed her talent when no one else would. He was also the man who had headed the Guild's investigative committee after the Meridian collapse, the committee whose final report had laid the blame squarely on a fatal design flaw, ending her career. "Alara," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "After all this time." "It was a good performance last night, Marcus," she said, her tone cool and even. "The standing ovation for Julian. Did your hands hurt from clapping so hard?" Marcus flinched, his gaze dropping to the chipped Formica tabletop. "It's not that simple. Thorne has a seat on every board, funds half the city's endowments. He's untouchable." Alara finished for him. "I know." She pushed a tablet across the table. On the screen was a simple architectural diagram. "I need you to look at this." He studied the image. It was the structural plan for one of Thorne's smaller, recently completed boutique hotels. The Celeste, standard cantilever design. "What am I looking for?" "The zoning variance," Alara said. "He got approval for a 5-foot cantilever over the public walkway. The city code is explicit 3 feet is the maximum for a structure of that class." Marcus frowned, tracing the lines with his finger. He must have had it reclassified, a historical preservation grant, maybe, or an arts exemption. "He didn't," Alara said. "I checked the public record. The application was filed, but the variance was denied. The final approved plan shows a 3-foot overhang, but the building, as it stands today, has 5. It's a minor violation, a footnote in a billion-dollar portfolio, but it's a loose thread." Marcus looked up, his sad eyes searching hers. "What are you doing, Alara?" "I'm pulling the thread," she said simply. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken history. "I never believed it was your fault," Marcus finally said, his voice thick with a guilt he had carried for 5 years. "The Meridian. There was so much pressure, from the investors, from the city, to find a simple answer, a single point of failure. And a single person to blame," Alara added, her voice devoid of accusation. It was a statement of fact. "All I need from you, Marcus, is confirmation. Is this violation as clear-cut as I think it is?" He studied the plans again, his old professor's mind kicking into gear, analyzing, dissecting. He nodded slowly. It's undeniable. Any first-year engineering student could see it. The permits don't match the as-built schematics. If an anonymous tip were sent to the Department of Buildings, with these two documents attached, they'd have to issue a stop work order on the final installations. They'd have to open an investigation. It would be an embarrassing and expensive public headache. Alara finished. Marcus pushed the tablet back to her. He looked older than he had just minutes before. Be careful, Alara. You're not just pulling a thread. You're tugging on a dragon's tail. I know, she said, her gaze steady. I'm counting on it. Later that day, a response to her dark web posting arrived. The message was concise, written in perfect, unadorned text. Inquiry received. Analyst available. Codename Nix. Communication via this channel only. Provide target parameters and initial retainer. Alara transferred the funds from an anonymized crypto wallet. She sent back a single file, a prospectus for Thorn Consolidated. Her instructions were simple. Start with the Celeste Hotel project. Find every payment, every contractor, every inspector's report. I'm looking for a ghost. She leaned back in her chair, the monitors casting a cool blue light on her face. The first move had been made. It was small, almost insignificant. A quiet word to a guilty mentor. An anonymous message to a digital phantom. But it was a start. A test. She had placed a seismometer at the base of Thorn's empire to see what would shake loose. The anonymous tip, sent from a public library computer and routed through 3 different countries by Nix, landed on the desk of a mid-level clerk at the Department of Buildings. The attached documents, the denied variance permit, and the final as-built schematic for the Celeste Hotel were irrefutable. Within hours, a bright orange stop work order was slapped on the hotel's front door. The story was picked up by a local, aggressive blogger known for hounding the city's real estate developers. The headline was small, but sharp. Thorn's newest jewel hits, permitting snag, cutting corners at the Celeste. The financial hit was negligible to a man like Julian Thorn, a rounding error in his quarterly earnings. The true cost was in annoyance and embarrassment. He sat in his office. The offending blog post displayed on a monitor. His legal team was already spinning it as a minor clerical error. But the damage was done. It was a small, public tear in his carefully woven tapestry of invincibility. Find out who sent it, he commanded his head of security, a humorless ex-cop named Shaw. I want to know who has the gall to waste my time. It was sent anonymously. Mr. Thorn, professionally scrubbed, untraceable, Shaw reported, his voice flat. Thorn stared out the window at the city below. His city. A clerical error, a disgruntled contractor, a rival developer. These were the logical explanations. But a cold knot of intuition told him otherwise. There was an elegance to the attack, a precision that felt familiar. It wasn't the brute force of a rival. It was the targeted strike of an architect. His mind drifted back to the gala, to the unnerving calm in Alara Vance's eyes. He dismissed the thought as paranoia. She was broken, a relic. Still, he made a call. It's Thorn, he said into his phone. That small consulting contract Alara Vance has with Sterling Cole. Make it go away. A conflict of interest. A change in direction. I don't care about the details. Just end it. Alara was at the drafting table in her apartment, sketching for the first time in years. When the call came, it was Mark Sterling, his voice strained and apologetic. Alara, I'm so sorry. We have to terminate your contract. The board. They've decided to go in a different direction with the community center project. Alara felt a cold sting, but her voice remained even. A different direction, Mark. We finalized the design concept yesterday. You called it transformative. I know. Look, this is coming from above me. Our primary investor. He expressed concerns. It's out of my hands. He didn't have to say the investor's name. They both knew. She hung up the phone, the familiar chill of exile seeping back into the room. It was the first time she had felt a flicker of hope, a chance to build again, even on a small scale. And Thorne had snuffed it out with a single phone call. He was sending a message, I see you. Stay down. But as she stared at the half-finished sketch of the community center, something else caught her eye. The property was adjacent to a block of old, low-rise commercial buildings. Her research for the project had included a deep dive into the area's property records. She remembered an anomaly. She turned to her computer and pulled up the city's property database. She cross-referenced it with financial news archives. A pattern began to emerge. Subtle at first, then glaring. Over the past 18 months, a series of shell corporations, all with different names, but registered to the same law firm, Thorne's law firm, had been aggressively buying up properties in a very specific, seemingly undesirable area of the city. They were paying far above market value for dilapidated warehouses, failing storefronts, and empty lots. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she mapped the acquisitions. The cluster of properties formed a distinct, unmistakable shape. They formed a perfect, unbroken ring around one specific, infamous parcel of land. A parcel that had been a public wound for 5 years. A block-square hole in the heart of the city, fenced off and overgrown with weeds. The site of the Meridian Tower. A shiver ran down her spine. This made no financial sense. That land was toxic, professionally and emotionally. No developer would touch it. The city had tried to rezone it for a memorial park, but the plan had been tied up in litigation for years by an anonymous consortium of concerned citizens. Thorne wasn't just trying to erase her future. He was obsessed with her past. He was methodically acquiring the land surrounding the grave of her career. Why? It wasn't about development. It was about control. It was a siege. This wasn't a business dispute. This wasn't retaliation. This was something else entirely. Something deeply personal. A new message from Nix appeared on her screen. Target's personal network is locked down. Financials are a fortress of shell corps and offshore accounts. However, found a recurring thread. A significant portion of his untraceable income is funneled into a single, tax-exempt entity, the Lily Thorne Memorial Foundation for Urban Safety. Alara's breath caught in her throat. Lily. The bright-eyed intern. The last face she saw before the world collapsed. Lily Thorne. She had never made the connection. In the chaos and trauma of the aftermath, buried under lawsuits and investigations, the name had been just one among the 57 victims. A tragic footnote. Now, it was the headline. Nix's message continued. Foundation was established 4 years ago. Sole benefactor, Julian Thorne. Mission statement, to promote accountability and higher safety standards in architectural and structural engineering. Attached is the Foundation's public charter and an article from the week of the Meridian collapse. Alara clicked open the second attachment. It was a grainy newspaper photo from a local paper, a collage of the victims. And there, in the third row, was the smiling, hopeful face of the young intern. The caption read, Lillian Lily Thorne, 21 architectural intern, sister of real estate developer Julian Thorne. The pieces slammed into place with the force of a physical impact. The public humiliation at the gala, the theft of her work, the quiet, systematic destruction of her life for 5 years, the obsessive acquisition of the land around the collapse site, the foundation in his sister's name, a monument to accountability. It was never about greed. It was never about business. It was a vendetta, a long, cold, meticulously planned revenge. He didn't just blame her for the collapse. He blamed her for the death of his sister. The revelation transformed the nature of the conflict. She wasn't fighting a corporate rival. She was facing a man hollowed out by grief and refilled with a chilling, singular purpose. His entire empire, his immense power, was a weapon aimed directly at her head. For 5 years, he had been systematically destroying her. Not for what she did, but for who he believed she was, the careless, ambitious woman who had killed his sister. The bare walls of her apartment seemed to close in around her. The fight was no longer about reclaiming her name. It was about survival. She looked at the rendering of the Meridian Tower, its elegant lines now seeming to mock her. The building hadn't just been her greatest achievement. It was the tomb of Julian Thorne's love and the birthplace of his hate. A cold resolve settled over her, displacing the shock. He believed she was a monster. He had spent 5 years trying to prove it to the world, and to himself. But his grief had blinded him. He was so obsessed with her supposed guilt that he had never stopped to consider the most terrifying possibility of all, that he was wrong, and that the real truth of what happened inside the Meridian Tower was still buried in the rubble, waiting for someone to start digging. Alara's stark apartment began to transform. The empty spaces on the walls disappeared behind sprawling diagrams, financial charts, and property maps. Blueprints of the Meridian Tower, reprinted from her digital archives, were pinned next to timelines of Thorne's acquisitions. Red yarn connected shell corporations to offshore accounts, a spiderweb of deceit with Julian Thorne at its center. The minimalist sanctuary had become a war room, every surface dedicated to the singular goal of dismantling an empire and uncovering a 5-year-old truth. She reached out to Marcus again, meeting him not in a public diner, but in the hushed, dusty archives of the university's architectural library. "He thinks I killed her." "Marcus," Alara said, her voice a low, intense whisper. "His sister, Lily. She was my intern. The vendetta. The last 5 years. It's all been for her." Marcus's face went pale. "My God, Alara, I knew he was ruthless. But this? His grief is a shield. He's using it to hide something," she insisted. "He built his entire empire on the insurance payout from the Meridian collapse. A payout that was expedited because the official report, your report, blamed a singular design flaw. It was clean. It was simple. It closed the case. The evidence pointed..." "The evidence was curated," Alara interrupted, her voice sharp. She unrolled a set of original structural analysis reports on the table. "I need you to look at these again, with fresh eyes. Forget the official report. Forget the pressure. We missed something. I know we did." Marcus hesitated, the weight of his past complicity settling on his shoulders. But looking into Alara's eyes, he saw not a broken woman, but a formidable investigator on the hunt. He leaned over the documents, the old instincts of the meticulous professor taking over. For days, they worked. Alara, fueled by cold fury, cross-referenced every invoice and supply manifest she could find in her archives. Nyx, her digital ghost, burrowed deeper into Thorne's encrypted servers, feeding Alara a steady stream of fragmented data. Marcus, driven by a desperate need for redemption, reran calculations and scrutinized metallurgical reports he hadn't looked at in years. "Here," Marcus said one afternoon, his finger jabbing at a column of numbers in a materials report. "This is it. The steel supplier for the primary support girders on floors 40 through 50. Titan Steel. Their bid was 20% lower than any competitor. At the time, We saw it as a cost-saving coup. I remember, Alara said. The project financiers were pushing hard to keep us under budget. I've been running simulations based on Titan's metallurgical composition, Marcus continued, his voice tight. Their steel contained trace amounts of sulfur and phosphorus that were just slightly above the industry standard. Not enough to fail a standard spot check, but under sustained tensile stress, the kind you'd see in a skyscraper of that height, it could lead to microscopic fractures. Over time, under the right conditions, a cascade failure. Substandard materials. Alara breathed. The oldest, ugliest story in construction. The collapse started on the 45th floor. It all fits. The financiers, Marcus said, his face ashen. They were the ones who insisted on Titan steel. They presented it as a take-it-or-leave-it condition of their continued funding. Who are they? Alara asked. The money was routed through a holding company. I never knew who was really behind it. A message from Nix blinked on Alara's laptop. She opened it. It was a single, heavily redacted document. A deed of incorporation for a holding company named Ethelred Capital. Nix had managed to peel back one layer of the anonymity. There was only one name listed on the founding charter. Julian Thorne. The air left the room. It was him, Alara whispered, staring at the screen. He was the financier. He pushed for the cheaper steel. He created the very weakness that brought the building down. But the realization raised a horrifying question. If he caused the collapse, then he was responsible for his own sister's death. The vendetta against Alara couldn't just be about grief. It had to be a cover-up, a way to create a scapegoat so no one would ever look at the man who had signed the checks and pocketed the insurance money. We need the final inspection report, Alara said, her mind racing. The one that cleared Titan steel for use. It would have been the final sign-off before construction continued. Marcus went rigid. A strange, shuttered look came over his face. He began shuffling papers, avoiding her gaze. That would be in the guild's archives, sealed, after the investigation. Marcus, Alara said, her voice low and dangerous. What is it? He wouldn't look at her. He stared at a faded blueprint on the wall, his jaw working silently. There was a concern. A junior engineer on my team flagged the metallurgical report from Titan. He thought the sulfur content was anomalous. What happened? Alara pressed. The financiers, Thorne's people, they came down on us. Hard, Marcus confessed, his voice cracking. They said if we delayed the project for a full review, they'd pull the funding and sue us into oblivion. They said it would ruin my career. And yours. They said you were a rising star. And a delay like this would tarnish you permanently. He finally turned to face her, his eyes swimming with a 5-year-old shame. I was your mentor, Alara. I was supposed to protect you. I thought I was protecting you from a minor hiccup, a political battle that would stall your masterpiece. I overruled the junior engineer. I signed off on the report. The confession landed with the quiet devastation of a collapsing building. Marcus, her beloved mentor, the man she had trusted implicitly, had buckled. In a misguided career-saving attempt to protect her, he had signed the document that condemned 57 people to death. He had handed Julian Thorne the very tool he needed to frame her. The evidence she needed to destroy Thorne, the falsified report. The proof of his financial coercion was also the evidence that would destroy the only professional father figure she had ever known. Alara felt a profound, hollow ache. She had set out to uncover a crime, and instead had unearthed a tragedy of weakness, guilt, and fear. The final piece of the puzzle was in her hand, but using it meant incinerating the life of a man she cared for. Julian Thorne had built his empire on a foundation of lies. But now, Alara stood on a moral fault line of her own. To expose the monster, she would have to sacrifice the man who had created her. Her path to redemption was suddenly blocked by an impossible choice. The annual shareholder meeting for Thorne Consolidated was being held in the Summit Room, a glass-encased space on the top floor of Thorne's flagship skyscraper. It was the heart of his empire, a throne room in the clouds. Through the panoramic windows, a storm was gathering, the sky a bruised canvas of purple and gray. Rain began to streak against the glass like tears. Alara Vance walked through the security checkpoint. Her simple black dress, a stark contrast to the sea of gray and navy suits. She carried no briefcase, only a small clutch. In her hand, she held a single piece of paper, a proxy vote, granted to her by a small, activist pension fund that Nix had identified and lobbied on her behalf. It gave her the right to speak for 3 minutes. 3 minutes to bring down a king in his own court. She took a seat in the back row. The room was filled with the quiet, confident hum of money. Board members occupied the front row, a stoic lineup of the city's most powerful figures. Julian Thorne stood at the podium, his back to the raging storm, the picture of calm control. He delivered a report of record profits and aggressive expansion, his voice a soothing balm of success. Marcus was in the audience, seated near the side aisle, his face pale and drawn. He had insisted on being here. He had told her, his voice heavy with resignation, that he was ready to face the consequences of his actions. Their eyes met across the room for a fleeting, painful moment. "And now," Thorne said, concluding his report, "we will open the floor to questions from our shareholders." This was her moment. Alara stood up. "A question for Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the polite murmurs. Thorne's eyes found her. His placid expression tightened, almost imperceptibly. He had not expected her here. Shaw, his head of security, took a step forward, but Thorne waved him off with a subtle gesture. "The floor recognizes the representative for the Municipal Workers' Pension Fund," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You have 3 minutes." Alara walked to the microphone in the center aisle. "This isn't a question, Mr. Thorne. It is a statement of fact." She began, her voice never rising, never betraying the turbulent emotions within her. She spoke of financial shells, of offshore accounts, of a company called Ethelred Capital. A low murmur rippled through the audience. The board members shifted in their seats. "For 5 years," she continued, "this company's charitable arm, the Lily Thorne Memorial Foundation, has been presented as a monument to urban safety. In truth, it has been a laundromat, washing the profits from a decade of systematic fraud." "These are baseless and slanderous accusations," Thorne interjected, his voice hardening. "Are they?" Alara countered. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small, almost invisible projector. She clicked it on the large screen behind Thorne, which had been displaying rising profit charts. An image suddenly appeared, the deed of incorporation for Ethelred Capital, with Thorne's name clearly visible. Gasps echoed through the room. Thorne's face was a mask of fury. "Kill the screen!" he hissed to Shaw. The main screen went black. A moment later, the lights in the room flickered and died, plunging the summit room into a semi-darkness, illuminated only by the emergency exit signs and the violent flashes of lightning from the storm outside. A deliberate power cut. But Alara had planned for this. The image on the screen had been a decoy. "You can cut the power," Julian. Her voice rang out in the dark. But you can't cut the truth. From a dozen different places in the room, the screens of smartphones and tablets suddenly lit up. Nix, working from a remote location, was pushing the evidence directly to the devices of every journalist, board member, and major shareholder in attendance. Document after document appeared on their screens: bank transfers, falsified invoices, evidence of Thorne's financial empire, built on a mountain of fraud. He built this company on the insurance payout from the Meridian Tower. Alara's voice narrated in the darkness. A payout he secured by creating a scapegoat. The lights flickered back on, revealing a scene of chaos. Board members were staring at their phones, their faces a mixture of horror and dawning comprehension. Journalists were already typing furiously. Thorne stood at the podium, his composure finally shattered, his face a storm of rage. "Security, remove her!" But Alara held up one final document, a printed copy she held in her hand. "This is the final inspection report for the steel used in the Meridian Tower. The report that cleared the substandard materials that led to the collapse." She looked at Marcus. This was the moment of choice. Expose Thorne, but destroy her mentor in the process. The lightning flashed, illuminating the anguish on Marcus's face. She took a breath. This report was signed under extreme duress, coerced by financial threats from the project's primary investor, Julian Thorne. She didn't say who had signed it. Instead, she projected another document onto the phones, a chain of internal emails, unearthed by Nix, showing Marcus repeatedly trying to raise alarms after the sign-off, only to be systematically silenced by Thorne's legal team. She had found a different path, a way to tell the whole truth without sacrificing the penitent. Julian Thorne knew the materials were flawed, she declared, her voice ringing with the force of absolute conviction. He pushed them through to save money. And when his creation collapsed, he let me take the fall. He built a foundation in his sister's name, a monument to a tragedy he himself orchestrated. The final piece clicked into place. Thorne's entire vendetta, his 5 years of calculated cruelty, had not been the righteous fury of a grieving brother. It had been the desperate, elaborate cover-up of a guilty man. He hadn't been destroying Alara to avenge Lily. He had been destroying her to bury his own monstrous secret. The heavy doors at the back of the summit room swung open. 2 men in dark suits entered, their badges identifying them as federal agents. "Julian Thorne," the lead agent said, his voice calm and authoritative. "You're under arrest." Thorne stared at Alara, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. The storm outside raged, its fury a perfect match for the ruin that had just crashed down upon him. He hadn't been undone by a rival corporation or a market downturn. He had been dismantled, piece by piece, in 3 minutes, by the ghost he thought he had buried. The architect had designed his demolition, and it was flawless. Months later, the autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of damp earth and new beginnings. A crowd had gathered on a plot of land that had, for 5 years, been a scar on the city's heart. The twisted rebar and broken concrete were gone, replaced by leveled ground and the promise of construction. The site of the Meridian Tower was being reborn. Julian Thorne's empire had been dismantled by the courts, his assets seized and redistributed. He was facing a lifetime in prison, a titan brought low not by a single blow, but by 1,000 meticulously documented cuts. Marcus, his reputation bruised but intact, had quietly retired from the university, dedicating his time to guest lecturing on architectural ethics. He and Alara had shared a cup of coffee in a quiet diner, a meeting filled with unspoken forgiveness and the quiet peace of a shared, heavy burden finally set down. Alara Vance stood at a simple wooden podium, looking out at the faces in the crowd. There were students, community leaders, and the families of those who had been lost here. She was not dressed in the severe armor of her past, but in a simple, elegant pantsuit, the clothes of a builder, not a warrior. Behind her, a large sign announced the project, the Lily Thorne and Meridian Memorial Institute. It was a vocational school, a place for the next generation of architects, engineers, and builders to learn their craft. It was funded entirely by the assets reclaimed from Thorne's corrupt empire. A final, poetic act of justice. She had taken the source of his power and used it to build something that would last. A building is more than just steel and glass, Alara began, her voice steady and clear, amplified by a small microphone. It is a promise of safety, of shelter, of community, 5 years ago, on this very ground. That promise was broken. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the site, seeing not the ghosts of the past, but the blueprints of the future. Today, we make a new promise. We promise to learn from our failures. We promise to hold ourselves to a higher standard. We promise to honor those we lost, not with monuments of sorrow, but with foundations of hope. We will turn this place of trauma into a symbol of creation. She looked toward the front row, where a young woman with a laptop and a mischievous smile sat watching. Nix Anya Sharma, as she was known in the real world, gave her a subtle thumbs up. Alara smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. This institute will not just teach our students how to build structures, she concluded. It will teach them that the most important thing an architect can ever design is a better future. She stepped away from the podium and picked up a silver shovel. Walking to a patch of prepared earth, she joined a line of community leaders. Together, they drove their shovels into the ground, turning over the first soil of the new foundation. The dirt was dark and rich. It was a groundbreaking. It was a burial. It was a resurrection. Alara looked up at the open sky, the same sky that had once seemed to be falling. Today, it was just a limitless expanse of blue, an empty canvas waiting for new lines to be drawn. Her work was not over. It was just beginning.